Cool. So we today are going to start going through how we're actually going to build out our navigation. A couple of the things that I wanted to talk through are just like general, inspiration things. So as like a front end developer, um, especially on a site like this where you may not necessarily be working super closely with like a specific designer or a UX person or something like that. I kind of wanted to talk through the whole process of like trying to figure out what we want to even build as far as the navigation here goes. Um, I think part of that is just like let's look at some inspiration. That's why I have a couple of these tabs open here, which we'll kind of go through in a sec, to just look through some inspiration as far as navigations go, and try and cobble together something that we are happy with stylistically without having a full-fledged design comp for or anything like that. So this episode will hopefully give us a good full understanding of the process from start to finish of like, you know, when you build these things out component by component, how do you get the inspiration to build whatever it is that you're going to build. And this, like, I'm not sure. This is very likely a process specific to me as a developer. Everyone has their own kind of way of doing these things. This is just a kind of a look into how I do it myself. So if you have a different kind of workflow, I'm super interested to hear your thoughts, how you go about trying to find inspiration for various pieces of a website that you're building, more or less in a silo. Ideally, I would like to collaborate with, a designer on these things and talk through some ideas and figure out like a plan for interactions and how the animations are going to play out, and actually kind of like write these things out in a little bit more of a defined way. Likely what's going to happen is we are going to build out this navigation, and then, off stream, off camera or whatever, I'm probably going to go through and tweak some things to get the to make sure that everything that I've done is done with intent. We're not just adding a bunch of animations for the sake of adding animations. We definitely don't want to like overload the user and make it way more complicated than it needs to be. Especially for a navigation, like if someone knows kind of what they're looking for, you don't want a bunch of animations that delay the user from taking an action they know they want to take. So you kind of have to be mindful of how you incorporate different animations, styles, all of that type of stuff to any given component. So these are all things that are kind of going through my head when we build these things. So yeah, that's just kind of a glimpse into how my brain works when we actually start building these types of components out. So the first thing that I guess we'll dive into here a little bit is just like trying to find inspiration for specific pieces of any given website. So we're working on a navigation. There's a couple different like UI sites that I'll just kind of look through a little bit here and there. Collect UI is one, collectui.com, and I'll put links to this down in the description as well. I mean, there are plenty of UI collection websites. Pick whichever one you want, and just kind of like scroll through and see what ideas are out there, and see if that kind of sparks something in yourself. A lot of navigations that have you know, more, I guess there's a lot of more like traditional navigations where it's just like text in the header, nice little underlined, you know, well designed typography. I'm not sure that's even a navigation. So this is the first step in any like design process, right? Is kind of just trying to figure out what the trends are, sort of, but also figure out the intent and direction that you want to take with your navigation. You know, like crazy stuff like this goopy little navigation are certainly options. Some of these have animations where I'm not sure that's a navigation, but it shows an interaction that I guess you could interpret as a navigation sort of thing. I have a few. I like to go through Dribble as well and get some good interaction ideas from there. I have a few links that I will move over here. So I kind of I collected these a while ago, some of them and a couple of them more recently. But like just kind of getting ideas for like the interactions of the navigation. I really like the smooth animations that the smooth transitions between this navigation looking screen and then the actual like page that those navigation items correspond to. I really like, and this definitely seems like a trend that is pretty common nowadays is having your actual pages or your navigation morph into the pages that they represent. It gives the sites kind of like a nice little flow. To me, it feels like there's a little bit too much going on in the animation of each of these things. So I like the direction that's been taken here, but maybe in our representation of it or whatever, we can maybe pare back on some of the animations within the actual page. I've got a couple more that I'll run through as well. We've got this one. Oh, whoops. That is a link to my Notion and not to the actual dribble shot. This one, I've been looking at this navigation for a while. I really like the interaction that have like the typography, the way that the active item kind of changes to that more outlined text, and the way that the navigation items on the right kind of correspond to what's happening on the left. So I like that, the interaction, just the style of that one quite a bit. We've got another one here. This is kind of more playing into the actual purpose of the website that we're building, since we're building the House of Giants like creative portfolio. This one is a little bit more professional, more in line with the actual purpose of the site that we're building. I like the subtlety of the animation here. I think it runs a little long because if someone was trying to navigate to that contact link down there on the very bottom, they have to wait for this whole animation to play out. I think if that animation happened a little bit quicker, it might be a little bit more like user friendly. So that's something to consider. I do like this full screen nav takeover kind of deal. It's a good. It kind of keeps the user's focus on, you know, what they actually intend to do a little bit. It allows us to have some space to do things like add the social icons down there at the bottom, or a little bit extra context for any of these pages and stuff like that. Let's take a look. I've only got a couple more. Yeah, this is a this is another solid interaction that I really like here as well. You know, there's a couple uh, pieces of emphasis on the actual animation of the menu icon, which that's a super cool little animation that happens there. The way that this navigation looks on desktop is definitely similar to the look that I'm trying to go for with the House of Giants site. Super clean, minimal, not a whole lot of navigation items to look through. But on desktops, it gives us a bigger canvas to add some additional information, whether that information is specific to the page that the user has hovered on, or if that is just some like marketing copy that is essentially like a call to action to say, hey, here's our contact information. If you just want to get in touch with us, you have that at your fingertips at all times. So rather than like burying your contact information down at the footer, like a lot of traditional portfolio sites will do, something like this gives you a good amount of space to do something kind of over on the right hand side. So I like the direction that this one's taking quite a bit. I'm going to leave that open in a tab for us to go back to. And then this one is a dribble shot for a personal site, kind of a similar portfolio site for Dustin Putnam. It looks like I love the clean, like the clean typography here, the subtle kind of easing animations that exist, the nice highlight colors. A blend of these two pieces is really kind of the direction that I think I want to take with our navigation. So this kind of exercise of just looking at inspiring work that other folks have come up with really helps to kind of trigger what it is you want out of the out of your design, I guess, or what the direction that you want to take with your design. It really helps to yeah, I guess kind of spark a little bit of inspiration. So the other thing about, I like the recently tweeted bit, especially, you know, if you're a if your portfolio or you as a person or your brand or whatever is very active on Twitter or social media or Instagram or whatever, perhaps adding a continuously updating component that hooks into like the Twitter API to pull in your latest tweet is a good idea. Gets you some of that additional exposure on your navigation as people kind of move about your site. They're always presented not overwhelmingly, but tastefully with your Twitter information. It's a good kind of like cross sell if you depend on like Twitter followers or anything like that. So I like that idea of having additional information in the navigation, especially when your navigation is going to be as small as ours is. We only have 3 links right now. We likely, you know, from a, you know, business standpoint, probably want to add a contact page for folks to be able to actually get in contact with the company. So we'll add this to our Gatsby config. And if oh, lovely. For some reason, I always think that anytime we make changes to this Gatsby config, we need to like rerun the Gatsby like develop command. But I just saved that and it showed right here. Obviously, we don't have a page set up for it, so let's just copy and paste this page, call it contact, and save. Refresh there, and we should be good to go. We need to change the title here to contact as well. That should change in the head. Awesome. I really like this this method of managing like the pages. It seems super clean a good kind of centralized way to manage your slugs, manage your navigation items, all of that type of stuff, the permalinks, whatever. Just seems like a nice, clean way to do it. And then you just query the nav with a nice static query from Gatsby, and you're good to go. So I like this method of managing the navigation here. Cool. So yeah, with this inspiration in mind, we can kind of start getting into a little bit of code here to figure out how we actually want to build out this component. So the first thing that we kind of want to do is just kind of get this navigation into a structure that makes sense. So I think the couple things that we know that we want to do for sure, we definitely want this navigation to be like a full kind of like takeover nav. Even if it slides out from the side and only takes up most of the page, kind of similar to what Dustin Putnam did here, where we have a good amount of room, but it doesn't take over the entire site, kind of fades out the background content a little bit here. I like that feeling for sure. We can try it both ways really, and see what feels better for our purposes specifically. But regardless, what we are going to need to do is kind of refactor this navigation a little bit to include some sort of like activator. So in both of these examples, there's a menu icon that you have to click to actually engage the navigation, to get it to show, to trigger the animations and figure out, or actually to actually show the navigation. So that is probably the first step that we want to take. So let's go into our navigation file here and kind of figure out how we want to do this, right? So with the structure that we currently have, we have this UL that contains all of our navigation items that are housed within LIs. What we can do is add another button in here. And we can add a button in here that has an SVG. Do we want to do an SVG for this menu activator, or do we want to do just straight up CSS and maybe use like a couple pseudo selectors? Let's see what we can do with pure CSS right now. We're going to keep the animations more or less simple, and then we can, expand on them a little bit, either off stream or kind of towards the end. We'll see how much, how long this episode runs. But we'll go with that for now. So what we'll do is we'll create a button. We don't want to create a link, an anchor tag, because anchor tags are specifically for taking you to another page, right? The semantics, like the HTML semantics of a button versus a link, the general thinking, right, is when you use a button, that is triggering an action actually on the page. It's not taking you to another page. It's not moving you from one spot to another. It's actually causing some sort of action on the existing page. Whereas a link, an actual anchor tag, will direct you to a whole new page, a whole new website. It'll take you off of the page that you're on right now. So from a semantic standpoint, when you're building out interactions like this, you definitely want to kind of think about the markup that you're writing. So for our purposes, we're going to go ahead and use a button. Within this button, we're going to want some sort of like screen reader text to allow folks using a screen reader to actually understand what this button does, what this action is going to do for them. So for our purposes, I'll just add an ARIA label. ARIA label on this button is going to just be open navigation. And definitely, I mean, put a little bit more thought than I am at this current moment into your ARIA labels. I'm, off stream definitely going to be testing this myself to see how this reads out in a screen reader to make sure that it would make sense to someone who actually depends on that screen reader. If the screen reader for whatever reason redundantly says like, nav, open navigation or something like that, or the readout of this is annoying, I will 100% change it to make sure that experience is good for the user who depends on the screen reader. So definitely take care and have a little bit of foresight into like what this will actually translate to on a screen reader with a screen reader. So with that, we are essentially just going to, we're going to be leveraging leveraging some pseudo elements for the navigation, whether it's 2 or 3 lines. We'll figure that out here in a second. I'm trying to think. Perhaps instead of an ARIA label here, we'll just add a span with a class name of screen reader text. And then within this span, we will add open navigation. Perhaps we'll call this toggle navigation. That might read out a little better. So this screen reader text class name, I should, and if I don't, we will add it, but I should in our typography, site resets, do we not have? We don't. Okay, that's fine. So in our typography CSS partial, technically JavaScript partial, in our typography partial here, I am going to add a screen reader text class, and I'm going to leverage the WCAG screen reader text recommended way of, here we go, yeah. We use the WebAIM recommended way for handling screen reader text. They have a couple recommendations. The position absolute method is totally fine. I like to use the CSS clip one, especially when you're building a site for modern browsers. You can use this clip path CSS property to essentially hide the piece of content from folks who don't need to visually see that text. This will hide it so that only screen readers will read the text that you have within this class. So we'll leverage the CSS clip method here. And I am going to be obnoxious, and alphabetize this. For my own sanity. Cool. So we've got the clip path and the clip handling most of the actual hiding of the thing. We set the width and height to 1 pixel. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and save that. And save the navigation and see where that leaves us. We may need to refresh. The hot module reloading doesn't work on this on our global CSS through styled components because it writes this to the head one time. We kind of have to refresh the page. I think we've gone over that before. But in any case, because this was part of our base CSS, I had to refresh the page to actually hide the content. So you can see that we still have default button styles on the button itself. So that's why you can see the button there. We will get rid of those right now, actually. So let's go back into our navigation component. So at this point, what we're going to want to do is we're going to write some CSS specifically for the navigation here. So for the time being, and we're going to move this in a little bit, but for the time being, we will write out a const styled nav, which will house the styled, and we're going to import the styled keyword from styled components. You can see right here that it, I want to organize this, yeah, all of that doesn't matter too much. Yeah, so you can see VS Code automatically imported styled from styled components for me so that I could leverage the styled keyword from styled components. So we'll do a styled nav here and write out some CSS. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that we change the actual nav element to be styled nav, so that it will take on the styles that we define within here. And let's add a couple class names. Class name singular. To this button, we're going to add just activator, so that we can target this button specifically. And then we'll add a class name to the UL that houses it. I can't talk and type at the same time because I start typing what I'm saying. We'll add a class name to the UL here so that we can target the actual list items and everything within the navigation. So we'll call this just site nav. This is the hardest part of any development project, is figuring out what to name it. Sure, yeah, we'll do that. Okay, great. Lovely. Okay, cool. So we have our styled nav. Let's actually start writing some CSS for it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is kind of take away the default styles on the button. Browsers add their own styles to UI elements like buttons, ULs, things like that. So let's override some of that. So the first thing, we're going to remove the border. Just do border 0. I think it comes with a background color as well. So we'll remove background color. Transparent, and I'm going to move that up. This will probably make everyone mad, but I have just been in the habit of alphabetizing my CSS for so long that it has carried over into my personal life. So that's kind of how I do it. I like the other way of doing it, where you kind of group things by like box model, typography, style things. I like that method as well. I just am not in the habit of doing it, and for the sake of time, I will just keep doing the alphabetizing of my CSS properties. So yeah, we'll just kind of keep going with that. And I am not even targeting the right element in here. I need to target the activator, and then grab these and move them up. I keep hitting the wrong button on my keyboard, and I'm so sorry. My sausage fingers don't ever cooperate. So yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so we're targeting the activator. We are setting the background color to nothing, no border, so that kind of goes away. We want to let's just add 2 lines for now, just with a before and after. So we can do that here. Do before and after on both of these. I want that to go away because it's taking up too much of the screen. Content, nothing. Let's say the height of each of these is going to be like 3 pixels. We want a background color, and I think in our variables, let's see what color we actually want to leverage, as my dog barks at something that is outside. neighborhood is safe. She is protecting. Okay, I don't have, oh my goodness. Let's use, let's use this blue-green color. So we're going to want to import our colors variable from our variable file. VS Code should do that automatically for me once I start typing in here colors. So you can see there, it's going to auto import those colors from styles-based variables where we define them. And I will use, let's just use rich black for right now. So we got a background color. We've defined the content to be empty. We have a height. Let's set a width of 100% on this. Let's see where this gets us. Nowhere for right now. Let's just look in the inspector. Let's just throw a min width on here of 10 pixels. There we go. Cool. So we definitely need to make sure that this is display block. We could have this be display flex and align the before and after at the top and bottom. Or we could just define some padding on one of the two. I think that's likely what we're going to want to do. So let's define a specific width on this. Let's say something like 30 pixels, or we can kind of leverage rems a little bit here if we want. No, I'll keep it at pixels on the width and height. And then specifically on the after, I want some margin top so as to not affect the actual size of the box here. So on the margin top, we will do 1 rem and see where that gets us. That is entirely too much. Let's take it down to like 0.3 rems. Do 0.3 rems. There we go. That feels a little bit better. Yeah. That should be fine for now. We can add a little bit of border radius to this. I'll just add like 3 pixels to make these edges not as hard. Border radius, let's try 6 pixels. Is it really doing much of anything? It's kind of hard to tell. We'll leave it at 3 pixels for now and see. I mean, if we bump this up to like 12 pixels, we should be able to see that border radius a little bit better. Yeah. Yeah, so it's there. It's just a little bit hard to see. For this activator specifically, we definitely want the cursor to become a pointer when we hover over it. So we can define that here, cursor pointer. That way it kind of gives folks the indication that you click on this and something happens. We have a focus state on there right now that is just the default like kind of blue outline highlight. We can change that a little bit here in a bit, but for now we'll just leave the default outline there. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay, cool. So we more or less just have the structure of our activator here. We definitely want this activator to be aligned over here on the right. We don't really have a container set on this at all, which is okay. For now, let's just Let's just float this guy to the right. Cool. So that'll stick to the right-hand side. We certainly need to create a container for this so that folks browsing on like a super wide screen don't have to like reach all the way over to activate the nav. But we will figure that out here in a bit. Okay, so we have our activator. We want to now hide and show the navigation on click. The first, before we get into that too much, this is kind of a good point to talk about like component structure, right? So right now we have, how many lines is this? About 20 lines ish of CSS that are kind of cluttering the top of our navigation component here. So if we're actually trying to get into this navigation component and do some work on the navigation itself, we have to scroll past these 20 lines of code. And in addition to that too, we're going to be doing a lot of styling on the actual like links and everything. So even as we get down into here, we're going to be adding more for the, what did I call this? Site nav. We definitely want this UL to have a list style of none to get rid of the dots. We want margin and padding to be 0 to get rid of just that excess default padding. So we're going to be writing a lot more CSS to handle the style of these navigation items, so we can easily get into 40, 50, 60 lines of CSS before we even get into the navigation. So this is kind of a good point to talk about like component structure, right? Like actually figuring out how we want to organize our components and more or less separate style from functionality, or like the business logic from the other logic, I guess. Is there a term for that? Yeah, business logic and other, I guess. In any case, though, it is likely going to make sense for us to split this out and import it into this component. So let's think about how we want to do that. So within our folder structure, we have a folder of components, and within that folder of components, what I generally like to do is have these more or less organized in such a way that they're independent, I guess. You can take this component and pretty much drop it into any project. The CSS is there, the logic for the actual component itself is there, and it's all kind of self-contained within its own little folder. Obviously, there's going to be some dependencies and stuff depending on the functionality that exists within that component, but you at least have a pretty good starting point for your component. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here for the navigation component itself. I'm going to move this navigation.js file into our navigation folder. It's going to break stuff because the reference to this navigation component has changed. So if we go into our layout where we're importing our navigation, we just need to update this reference, which VS Code I think already did for me. So you can see here, and this is potentially one of the drawbacks of this method, is the way that these components are imported kind of gets a little bit verbose and potentially annoying. As you can see, we're importing navigation from components /navigation/navigation. And I've run into this dilemma before, and I'm still not 100% sure how I really like to handle it. I've tried things like changing this navigation.js to index.js so that you can just import navigation from components /navigation, and the import automatically will grab the index file within that folder and use that as the reference point for the import. But The problem with that is when you start actually working on several components at a time, you're pretty much only ever searching for an index.js file within a folder. So it's a lot harder to use like VS Code's like pane navigation here for navigation, because you would have to look for an index.js file within source components navigation, or because all of your other components are also within an index.js file, it'll end up listing out all of the folders for typography, for footer, for blog post, for whatever. It'll list all of these index.js files out, and that gets a little annoying too. So it's kind of a balancing act between what is the least annoying thing. And right now, I think that this method is the least annoying, where it's components /navigation /navigation. And I know you can create like aliases, like import aliases and stuff like that for these directories, or directory aliases, whatever they're called. But for our purposes right now, I think we'll just go with this somewhat redundant methodology of importing components, and just kind of leave it at that. If anyone out there has a different, more intuitive way of handling component organization, I am happy to hear it and talk about it and see how it feels in a production environment. But for now, what we'll do is just import navigation from our components navigation folder, navigation file. I'll go ahead and save that, and save navigation.js, and we should be in good shape here, which we are. Good. Okay, cool. I'm going to add a little bit of padding to the nav itself. On the top and bottom, we'll just do like 2 rems. Even on the left and right. So we'll just do a full 2 rems all around on the top, bottom, left, and right. Just to give ourselves a little bit of space to see what we're working with here. Cool. So that gets us there. The next thing that we'll need to do is actually split out the styled nav CSS into its own file. So let's create a new file. And I like to just name these files the same thing that they are, right? So this is going to be styled nav. And I guess because our navigation.js file is the full word navigation, we can do styled navigation.js just to kind of keep things connected, more or less. Okay, cool. So I've got all those files open. I got styled navigation here. It's just empty in the navigation. Because we imported styled and the colors, we can rip those 2 things out of the navigation itself. Grab the styled component, cut it out of there, and put it into the styled navigation.js file. And this should be all we need. The only other piece that we will need to do is actually export this styled nav const. So we can just export const styled nav, which will make this available to our navigation. And we can retype this out and have styled nav. We can have the import handled by VS Code. And because we did a named export, instead of doing down here at the bottom, export default styled nav, instead of doing that, we decided to do a named export, and that just gives us some flexibility. So if we needed to add some more specific styled components to the nav, if we wanted to split this activator out into its own styled nav component, we could do that within this same file and export specifically the activator. This just kind of keeps things clean in my head. Again, that is not, by any means law or anything like that. So whatever is preferable to you, I like to use named exports for styled components specifically. So you'll see here the import is looking for that named export within those braces there from styled navigation, which just exists in the same folder. So we don't need to do, .. anything. It's all right there. So we've imported the styled nav. We should be able to use it. Once I save it, everything should be exactly the same. Nothing changes. Even if we refresh, all is good and everything is working. I like going over that because it's one of those things that we've talked about it before in some of the previous episodes, but it's like it's forethought for your future self or other developers that are working on your project. If you had all of that CSS at the top of this file, you're going to be real mad at yourself when you need to like go in and quickly fix something. If somehow the navigation broke, you need to go figure out why, like super quickly, but you have to scroll past like 120 lines of styled component CSS at the very top of your file. It's going to get annoying really quickly. You can certainly rearrange where that CSS is defined within this file if you really like the idea of keeping everything contained in one file. I suppose you could throw that const down at the bottom. But again, if you had a lot of business logic up at the top where you need to scroll past it, several hundred lines in order to get to the CSS, is going to be a little bit frustrating. So I like the separation of concerns personally. That keeps the navigation business logic in one file and the navigation styles in another file. The rest of the logic, I guess, in another file. So you have that separation of concerns so you can kind of work on one thing at a time and know exactly where everything is coming from. You don't clutter the top of your file with the imports that are specifically for the styled component. And it lends itself to help you be able to leverage like atomic design principles a little bit easier, I think. So, with atomic design principles, you want to figure out what is an atom, what is a molecule, what is an organism, and separate those things out individually. So we're kind of at a point right now where we can look at this styled nav and we see that we have this styled nav itself is becoming an organism, right? So because we have this activator, which by itself is an atom. It's one piece of a whole. So the odds are that we can probably split this out into its own component that we import into our navigation. We can do that in a second, but like even the site nav itself, this is a piece of a bigger whole, right? It is a piece of it's an atom within an organism, or a molecule within an organism, I guess. So we can start to split these things out a little bit more to keep things super componentized. You can obviously, go overboard with this and over componentize things. Like sometimes you may not necessarily need, to import a button element into your component because it's so vastly different. There's a lot of nuance, I think, around this, but the thought process behind atomic design is to keep everything in its own separate piece, so that it can be managed easier. So that's what we'll do here. We'll kind of employ some atomic design principles and split these out into their appropriate atoms, and then import them. So the way that we can think about this activator specifically, there is no other place on our site specifically where this activator is going to live, right? This is a piece specifically for the navigation and nothing else. So what we can do is house this atom within our navigation, and then import it into the bigger piece here. So what we'll do in our navigation folder is add a, we'll just call it activator, I suppose. We'll add an activator file. We will take this HTML, and we're essentially, so the first thing that we need to do with any JavaScript file here is import React, capital React from React. And then we'll just do a super simple stateless component, or a functional component, I suppose, that is activator. And it's just going to implicitly return this HTML. Now, if we find at some point down the road that we want to leverage this activator in a different context or something, and we need to add some like props to it to change the behavior, or pass along a different set of on-click behaviors, we can do that pretty easily with this split out here. We could even set this up to be a higher order component that allows you to change the text within here. So if we're using this in a different context, it's not necessarily going to be toggle navigation, it's going to be toggle something else. So we can do, this allows us to be quite flexible with our components by building them out using atomic design principles, right? So yeah, so with this, we have our activator. We need to export it, export default activator. We've got the class name here. Everything should be good. We'll save that, and then we will remove this and let VS Code auto import activator for us. Save that. Nothing's going to change here on the front end. Even if we refresh, just to make sure everything's still looking good. So we've removed a little bit of markup here. That's good. We can continue to go even further. We could split each one of these list items out into another component that is a nav item component. So let's do that as well. I'm trying to think. It might actually, let's do a little bit of renaming here. I'm going to rename this to just nav to keep things a little bit shorter. It's going to probably break stuff as I rename things, but we will handle it here in a second. Nav, styled nav. And this is going to allow me to a little bit easier like prefix these things. So instead of just activator, I'm going to have it be nav activator well, do I have to do that? I'm telling you, naming is the hardest thing about any development job. I suppose we don't have to do that because it's within the navigation folder. And instead of the full navigation word here, I'm just going to do nav. And that should hopefully, we're going to import. We need to rename a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to rename the folder. Oh, hello. Why is it not letting me do that? Oh, that's strange. What happened here? Oh, it's bizarre. Let's just import. Nav items, const nav, export default. Yeah, okay. I guess it kind of updated everything that we really needed it to without too much trouble. I really would like to rename this to just nav, but it's not letting me. Operation not permitted. Oh boy. Oh, that's so obnoxious. Let me Okay, let me see if I can do it from here. Oh, that I sometimes Windows infuriates me. Unable to move navigation to component. Yeah. I gotcha. Do nothing is open. Oh, it's so obnoxious. Okay, well, whatever for now. I guess it doesn't matter too much. I'm going to figure that out. I would like to have this be just named nav, not navigation, because navigation is a lot more letters. So, yeah, I'll fix that eventually, I suppose. Anyway, all right, so we can just keep moving on. So what we were talking about, let's make a nav item component. We're going to import React from React every single time. And then we're going to make a new const called nav item. That is just a implicit return, an implicit return that takes these. And this is going to be a little bit more interesting because we need to receive some props from our navigation. So as we map over our nav items that we've queried for, we need to pass that data down to each individual nav item. So we can remove those parentheses so that we can do a little bit of shorthand here. Nav item, which I think I still need to export. So I've exported that. We should now be able to do nav item, and presumably that'll auto import. It didn't like that. There we go. Sometimes it takes a minute for it to actually like kick in. Okay, so we have a new React component called nav item. I'm going to separate out these imports a little bit. I like to have the CSS stuff down towards the bottom after a return. I just like to have a little bit of space. So like the stuff at the top is the kind of like the NPM packages, you know, that we're importing pieces of. The second portion is going to be actual components that we're importing into this component that we're working on. And then the last thing that we're going to import are the styles. That's just how I like to organize the top of my component files. You know, certainly you do you, however you want to organize that. That is just fine. In any case, we need to pass this nav item data down to our individual nav items. So what we can do in here is say that we're going to receive some props called nav item. I'm trying to think how we can destructure this a little bit more so that we're not calling nav item each time. We will figure that out momentarily. I suppose what we could do is if we know, well, no, because if we need at some point to get more information from our nav item, I think I would prefer to just have all of the data passed down to each nav item so that we don't have to individually define a whole bunch of props. That makes sense for some components. I think this nav item one in particular, we will just pass down nav item props as nav item. So we've defined a nav item prop. We're giving it this nav item data. If we save that, it's going to break here because we haven't saved our nav item. I think this is all that we need to do. We're going to need to define some prop types just for I'm blanking on the word. Prop types. we're going to need prop types to make sure that the data that we're receiving is in the structure that we need it. If it's a string, number, whatever, we need to make sure that we are getting the proper data. Although because this is an object, we'll need to do the shape of that. It doesn't matter too much right now. Okay, so we're passing down nav item data to each one of these LIs. If we save this, things should... link is not defined. So we're importing link from Gatsby. I don't believe, are we using link anywhere else in this file? I don't believe that we are. No, so we can go ahead and get rid of that import on our nav and import that solely in here. Import link from Gatsby. Save that. And everything is still working exactly how we'd expect. So we've received these props. I want to figure out a good way to destructure this. So let's think about this. And perhaps we'll just leave it for now. I mean, I can turn this into a non-implicit return, right? And do something like this, where we return all of this stuff. I keep hitting the wrong button. And then up at the top here, we can, do const name slug equals nav item. And I suppose that's not bad for now. I just like to avoid... it feels nice to me to have whatever I can just be an implicit return rather than like shoving a whole bunch of JavaScript up at the top here. But in any case, this cleans it up a little bit and allows us to destructure up here. So we'll just do that for now. Destructuring, I imagine most folks watching this are relatively familiar, but this is essentially just extracting pieces of an object and allowing us to use that reference rather than having to call navitem.name. We're defining name as a variable that we can reference within our code, and it's essentially just taking those pieces out of the nav item object and allowing us to reference them by their actual key name. Okay, cool. So that is nice. That kind of cleans up our code here a little bit. It helps us to start thinking in a little bit of an atomic design sort of way. So we can start really like piecing these things out into their, individual atoms, molecules, that type of thing. It's a good practice to get into as you're building any modular web app, website, whatever, to kind of get your mind in a position to start thinking about how I can break these down into their smallest pieces. It really helps me personally to think about things in this way, because down the line, it'll just be much easier to be able to go into the specific component that you actually want to work on, change stuff there and not affect anything else outside of it. So that's kind of the strategy that I like to employ there. Wonderful. Okay, so with that, we now want to write a little bit of JavaScript to hide and show the site nav itself. So because we are going to, on all screen sizes, hide the actual navigation behind the activator itself, we're going to want to write a little bit of conditional logic. And this is actually where we're going to get into talking about hooks as well. So we're going to leverage hooks to toggle the visibility of the navigation. Now, I want to think through how I want to do this, because with some of the animation stuff that we're going to want to do on the site, I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to potentially pull in an animation library that I've been using on another project that I really like. It's the Framer Motion API. Framer by itself, I think, used to be like a standalone like GUI for that would generate like React code and stuff for you, but they have a specific animation API that works super well with like GSAP and everything. GSAP being another green sock animation platform is what it stands for. I think platform. I think that's the right acronym. It's green sock in any case. They have a lot of really good like tools for SVG animations, WebGL, if you want to get into like the ridiculous complex nature of like Canvas and WebGL and stuff like that. Their animation library is pretty solid. It runs really smooth and helps to kind of give our animations that nice cohesive feel. And it ends up being a little bit more performant. I think they do a lot of work both on Framer and GreenSock's end to make sure that these animations are like performant. And as long as you use them correctly, which I have definitely broken them myself before, but as long as you use them correctly, the animation should be smooth and not take away from your site's performance. So I think what I'd like to do is let's install Framer and use some of the base level Framer stuff to actually like hide and show our navigation. So we're definitely going to want some similar kind of animation behavior that we saw in some of the inspiration that we were looking at. I think what we're going to do is kind of trying to plan this out, right? I think what we're going to do is we're going to have our navigation slide in from the left, the same, direction that the actual activator exists. We're going to slide this in from the left, maybe not take up the whole screen, but take up a good, 70-80% of it, and slide this in, and then have each one of our nav items very quickly so as to not impede the user from doing whatever task it is that they're trying to do, but very quickly just have each of the animation items kind of staggered animate up or down. We'll kind of play around with that and see where we get. But Framer is going to help us to do that. And one of the reasons that I want to get Framer in here early is because Framer helps us to handle animations when components mount and unmount, right? So that's one of the more difficult things about animating anything in React is that the DOM, the component that you're working with sometimes doesn't exist in the DOM at all. So you can't really like target that DOM node with JavaScript and wait for it to show up and then trigger an animation as soon as it's mounted. You can, it's difficult. So a library like Framer helps us to be able to, detect when a component is being mounted or unmounted and wait for the animation to finish before it's unmounted, for example. Those are the types of things that Framer does well for me. And there's 1,000 different animation libraries out there for React, and you explore all of them and see what works best for you. I've looked at a few, and Framer is what I'm most familiar with and has worked well for me in the past. So that's something to just keep in mind. Definitely don't take this as like I am fully endorsing. Framer Motion is the only React library you should ever use for animation. That's certainly not the case. It is just the one that I am familiar with that has worked well for me in the past. So explore all of them and see what works best for you. So yeah, let's just go to the quick start real quick. I'm going to install Framer Motion and save it as a dependency. Do I need to save it as a dev dependency or just a dependency? Probably just a dependency. So we will, let me open up a new bash here. We're just going to do npm install -- save. I write everything out the long way. I know I can do npm I capital S or whatever, but I don't. So we will just move on. Framer Motion. npm install save Framer Motion. That'll save it as a dependency. And it's going to add, I'm sure, a ton of packages. So we'll just give it a minute. I need to be like Jason Langsdorff and have some hold music play while we wait for something to install, right? Oh my gosh, I have to sudo do it. Oy. Is that the right password? That's the right password? That one looks like it liked it better. Yeah, okay. I'm going to delete the debug log. This time everything's going to be fine. I just did, you dingus. Okay, so this is clearly being annoying. So that Okay, let me reopen this in WSL and see if you're going to start in safe mode without all of my plugins and everything, but whatever. I just need to install a npm package, please. This time everything's going to be just fine. It's going to work flawlessly, no problems. Thank you so very much. Terrific. Package.json, Framer Motion is in there. We're in good shape. Okay. Did that close? That closed all of my. Oh my goodness. Okay, cool. Yeah. Yep. No problem. House of Giants. It's opened in remote. We can now close the remote connection so that I can get all my plugins back. But you're not going to actually open, are you? Excellent. No, stop opening in WSL. Hello? Oh, this is incredibly obnoxious. I'm so sorry. folder. House of Giants. Oh my goodness, that was a struggle. I apologize. Okay, I think we're in good shape. So we have Framer Motion installed. Terrific. Cool. So now we can leverage some of the things that Framer Motion provides us when we want to start animating some stuff. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we don't want the site nav to show at all until someone has toggled the activator, right? So let's look at the docs and look at an example for false presents exit complete. So we're looking for Framer has a similar to like React hooks. It has a hook that is like toggle something, use, not cycle, transform, new. Let's just Google it. Framer Motion toggle hook, something like that. Keyframes, variants, gesture animations, motion values, viewport scroll, exit animations, position. Well, I suppose we don't need to leverage this. It might make sense to just actually go through like normal React hooks rather than muddying it up with a library. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay. So for our purposes then, I guess we'll just use normal React hooks. So we're going to import from React. I believe it's use. It's not use effect. Use state is what we need. So we're essentially going to attribute some state to our navigation. So the state is, is the navigation open or closed? Very simple. So with that, within our nav element here, we are going to want to, instead of doing an implicit return here, we are going to want to add some markup. Return. So we're going to want to add some markup to essentially like trigger that state change when we click on the activator. So in addition to use state, we're going to need a use effect to, no, maybe we won't actually. One thing at a time. Okay, so we're going to want to attribute some state to our nav. So let us do const. And I'm not like a super React expert or anything. I just know how to use hooks. So when we define a hook for use state, right, we define two things in this destructured array type of format. The initial state and then a trigger to change that state. So we're going to do is open and toggle open. So the is open is going to tell us whether or not the navigation is open, true or false, and then we're going to have a on-click handler that allows us to toggle whether or not that navigation is open. So we do that in this destructured format here, and we can actually look at the React use state docs just so that I don't misstate anything. So we declare a new state variable, which in our case we are counting or calling is open and toggle open. I suppose we can kind of keep it in the same format, set open, as the documentation recommends. Count, set count. We have is open and set open, and then we set that state variable to use state. And then within these parentheses, this is where we define the default state, right, of our component. So for ours, the default state is going to be false. By default, we do not want the navigation open. And from there, we've used hooks now to establish a state on our component, right? Through this, we can then do some conditional rendering. So we could say if is open, then render out the UL. And this is just JSX like conditional rendering. So I'm checking the isOpen variable and saying if isOpen is true, then render this out, otherwise don't. So when I save this, presumably our navigation goes away, but I need to restart npm run develop. Because I closed out of this window, I don't have the server running, so it's not going to do anything. Now it's just broken completely. Hello? One thing after the other, I guess. Like my node modules are still there. I may need to remove the package lock and reinstall. npm run develop. Okay, it's at least starting now. Strange. WSL, like Windows WSL sometimes does some very strange things when it comes to like permissions and stuff like that. So in any case, all right, saved that. I'll just save it again just to make sure that nothing set open as assigned value but never used. That's fine. Awesome. So you can see here in the inspector that within our nav, we only have the activator button and not the UL because we have set this to be hidden by default. And it's not rendering anything because it's not open. So that is wonderful. If we look at the docs, you can see that we've defined this set count state variable, which allows us to actually perform an action on the state that we've defined along with it, right? So with our activator, which is just a button, we can set our onClick action to a function that runs set open to the opposite of isOpen. So it looks at isOpen currently and will run this function to set open to the opposite of whatever it is right now. So it's just a simple toggle function. Theoretically. And yes, okay, this makes perfect sense. So I've defined this onClick action on our activator component, but our activator component doesn't have any way right now to pass that onClick function down to this button. So what I need to do is set that onClick as a prop that we pass down to our button. Now, I did not set a key. That is fine. But for the time being, you can see that clicking on the activator now toggles the visibility in the DOM completely of the navigation, which is great. So this does a few things accessibility wise as well. So by default, kind of the way you want to think about this, right? Like if someone's using a screen reader, you don't want them to unnecessarily go through content that is not actually visible on the page, right? So one thing that this mounting and unmounting of the component in the DOM at all does is it removes the ability or the need for us, at least initially, to do the toggling of like ARIA hidden true, ARIA hidden false, all of that type of stuff. There are still ARIA attributes that we need to apply to our both the activator and the navigation to make sure that we are announcing that something is changing. And like, we'll look into this too, but whether or not we need to change the focus of the like the actual like tab focus onto the first navigation element when the user toggles this with their keyboard or something like that. There are accessibility considerations that we still need to make, but this helps us to kind of keep the DOM clean as far as elements that are not actually shown on the page. They don't exist in the DOM, so they're hidden from screen readers regardless. So it's just a bit of a side note, but something that is helpful to us. So cool. So we've got that toggle working. We've passed the on-click function down as props to our button itself. That'll actually run. We've used hooks very simply to do a true-false trigger. Nothing super crazy there. Now, what we'll do with our with Framer is actually add a little bit of motion to this. And actually, before I even do that, let's just set this to true for now so that the navigation shows up on its own. Just so that I can do a little bit of styling here. So what we want to do is style this site nav UL itself. Now, because this site nav is do we want to call this like a molecule, I suppose, that houses a few different, it really only houses one. For right now, let's just keep things moving a little bit here. For now, I'm just going to add these styles in the styled nav partial that we've defined already, and we can refactor this later if we need. So I've already got some stuff in the site nav here, so let's just continue with that. So the site nav on its own, we definitely want to position. Do we want to position this like sticky so that as you scroll down the page, the navigation is still there? That's something we can figure out later as well, I suppose. So for now, let's just do position absolute. Position absolute. We're going to set this top 0, bottom 0 to take up the whole height of the screen. And then we're going to do width. Let's just do 80 vertical width. Let me do this. That should be good. The background on this, background color, we're going to use colors dot. Let's go with rich black just for now to see what that looks like. I need to set this to left 0. Because there's nothing above this, because the container for our styled nav is not positioned relative, it's just going to crawl up the DOM and be relative to whatever the nearest relatively positioned item is, which at this point right now is just the body. So that's why we're not really doing anything else with this other than setting position absolute on it. Yeah, just an explanation there. I don't like the contrast of that. That's just too stark for me. I don't remember what some of these colors actually are. That is a little bit too bright for me. That was blue-green, I think. Yeah, let's try. I feel like mint cream is going to be even brighter than that. Oh no, that's the background color. Okay, we don't want that one. Tulip. I think I can deal with that one. Let's just look what yellow looks like. Absolutely not. That is so bright. That needs to just be a highlight color. Okay. I suppose we could do the same background color and just kind of contain things a little bit more. Even if we just went a little bit lighter than whatever this mint cream color is, just something to set it, or maybe a little bit darker. Let's see if we can find like a shade of this. So if we go to like Adobe Cooler, let's find some shades of that F7 color. Do shades. Let's go. Nope, that's not helpful. Like a little bit less aggressive shades here. No. Those aren't different enough. Monochromatic. That's not terribly helpful. Okay, let's just try to find a little bit more. I just want to get a little bit of separation between, let's go with that, the between the navigation and the background. I don't want it to be like super crazy like that super bright yellow. That's a little bit too much contrast between the two. So we're going to find a name for this color. Color name. Name that color. We'll call this gallery. Okay, so in the variables, I'm going to create a new color variable. And we're calling this gallery. Just a little bit of a different shade of that white. Colors.gallery. Refresh just to get all of my inline stuff out of there. Cool. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of contrast between the navigation and the site. I'm probably going to gray out the background here a little bit, create like an overlay potentially. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay, cool. So as far as each of these individual nav items, There was an error in the console about how I don't have unique keys for each one of these nav items. And that's because I need to define it on the thing that we're actually mapping. So we had keys set on these LIs before we moved them into their own component. So if we go back to the nav and we'll close this to get a little bit more room. The nav item itself needs to have a key of, what did I have it set as? Oh, did I not copy that? Hello? Nav item. The key was just the name. Okay. Key is just the name. So we'll do key, nav item, name. That'll set the key on this nav item component. If I refresh this, we should not have any console errors. I don't know why I'm getting a component will mount deprecation error, because I'm not using that anywhere. Huh, that's strange. I guess we'll kind of ignore that for now. It is bizarre. I'll have to look into that. Okay, in any case, we've set a key on these nav items that we're looping over. So that should take care of that error. And at this point now, we should be able to style the actual nav items. So within the site nav, this is kind of lending itself to why we should break it out a little bit as well, because we're starting to get into, we're nesting some styles within the site nav. So that is an indication that it could potentially be split out a little bit more. But just to keep things moving, we'll go ahead and just style the LIs, the direct descendant LIs. Actually, the first thing that we'll want to do is probably style the anchor tags. Let's remove the underline, so text decoration none. We want to definitely change the color of these to probably be just our dark black color. Colors dot rich black. Definitely want to adjust the font size. Let's go with something pretty big. We'll go with 4 rems for now and see where that gets us. We will change the font family to, I think there's do I have a font? Let's look at the variables real quick. Header font, body font. Let's go with the header font. We kind of want this to be like a display, because these nav items are going to be pretty big, so we want this to mimic the display font, I think. So let's go with header font, which is automatically imported. And you can see at the top, VS Code just added the header font import of that variable from our variables file so that we could use it. I housed this within typography. So if we need, which actually we're going to need, the body font at some point, most likely. But I guess we'll leave this in here for now until we actually get to that point. So let's see where this gets us. Okay, cool. I like the direction that this is taking so far. Okay, lovely, cool. Let's think about the layout that we want for this navigation. We definitely want this coming from the right hand side. So instead of having the left position be 0, we want right to be 0. Move that down. Since our nav activator is over there on the right, we want this navigation to be coming from the right, from the action that user took. Yeah, so that should be fine. we will want the activator itself to have some position, relative, and then a z-index so that we can keep that activator on top of everything else. So we'll set a number like 10 just to get that activator above everything else so that we can continue to toggle the navigation on and off. I think that we should probably have the text here aligned to the right. Because if we're going to add some extra components to this navigation for things like whether that's like a Twitter feed or some additional like contact and social information, how do we want that laid out? I think initially what we can probably do here is on this site nav add just some all around padding. We can probably add a decent amount of it to kind of just get things a little bit further away. I'm also going to set the box box sizing. Yeah, if I can spell it correctly, sizing, border box, just to make sure that that padding doesn't extend the width of the item or the component here. The box sizing border box has the padding calculated into the width of the item that we've defined with the ADVW here. So just a little bit of padding. Maybe I like these items over here on the left, and that gives us space on the right to add some of that additional information. Yeah, let's go ahead and keep that. I'm going to add some padding bottom to each of the LIs here, just to kind of add a little bit more space between each one of the links. So let's just add like 1 rem of bottom padding. That's not enough. Let's do 3. Just to get a good separation between each one of these nav items. So we've got that. Definitely want to add a little bit of like a hover state to these items. I really like this. There's a box shadow trick that allows us to essentially like animate a nice little highlight color up from the bottom. So by default, I think what we want to do is add a box shadow to the anchor tags and the values here. So it's the left and right is definitely going to be 0. We want the spread to also be 0 because we want this to just be a solid highlight color. And then initially we're just going to have this be transparent. Let's style out the end color here first. So let's do colors dot. Let's leverage that mint cream color here and see where that gets us. So from the bottom, we want this to be something like, let's say, 0.3 rems. Okay, so maybe quite a bit bigger than that. Let's go with 1 rem. And that, I keep forgetting that mint cream color is the background color. So let's go with tulip. Well, no, let's go with blue-green. Okay, I like that. Let's see, where is that growing from? So it's growing down. I think what we want to do is add an inset into this to put the, there we go. Do we want this to be negative? Yes, we most certainly do. Okay, so this is going to be the end state of our hover on our navigation. And the reason that I like this is because it allows us, so I'm going to copy this, change this to an initial 0, and then on hover, hover, we can change the box shadow here, and we can tell our anchor tags that we're going to transform them, or transition. This is just like, these are defaults in my brain that I always use. I always, for whatever reason, use 300 milliseconds. 300 milliseconds, ease box shadow. So that when we hover, you get a nice little highlight on each one of the nav items. Nice. Nice. Yeah, that's a good, we can explore the other colors too, just kind of see what they end up looking like. Whoops, yeah, we need to do that on both, obviously. Ooh, oh, I do like that. We can actually have this initial color be transparent because we don't need to animate. It does fade it. Yeah, we'll keep it solid the entire time. I do like that color. That's a good transition there. What's up, Lumjacker? Thanks a lot for the follow. I appreciate that. We're just trying to figure out a good highlight color for these. The yellow does look really good too. Oh, it's tough. I'm going to stick with the blue-green for right now. I am indeed. I am a web developer, Lumjacker. I've been doing this for about 10 years now. So yeah, a little bit of time doing web development stuff. And this needs to be changed back to blue-green as well. Yeah, we're going to stick with this blue-green color for right now. Cool. So that kind of gets us in a good spot with these hover states. I'm not self-taught, actually. I went to the Art Institute here in Denver a long time ago. They had like a web development program that was essentially like a college program that we ran through, and I'm not 100% sure that it was like worth it. I feel like the self-taught folks have a lot more resources than I did 10 years ago when I started doing this, to be able to be like a solid self-taught web developer. Yeah, I just didn't have the resources to really know how to do that myself. So I ended up, going to a full-fledged like college. So yeah. Oh, nice. Cool. Yeah. It's, there's nothing more complicated and fun and annoying all at the same time as building a portfolio for yourself, because you, if you're anything like me, I don't know, I like second guess everything that I do all the time. It's like, no, I can totally like design this in a different way, or do something cooler than what I'm thinking about. So like, yeah, I'm not sure if that happens for you too, but I definitely go back and forth on stuff a lot. You can definitely drop a link into the chat and I'll kind of bookmark it off to the side. I definitely want to kind of keep going with the stuff that we've got going on here, just to kind of finish out this feature that we're building. But I will happily take a look at it and then message you later and let you know what I think for sure. Happy to do that. Yeah. Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that. We're we're in the early stages of it, but we've got some good typography. I think we've got a good color palette that we've worked out. Um, I if you take a look at I have a link down below. This is like a whole series that I've been doing of stuff for like a Gatsby site that we've been building. So if you're interested in kind of some of the subjects that we've covered in the last 3 episodes or whatever, there's a link to the YouTube down in the panels below, and you can kind of check that out too. So we're building just a portfolio for my web development company. We have a really old portfolio that needs updating badly. So we're kind of just running through some stuff with this Gatsby site here to to redesign it a little bit. Oh yeah, you absolutely can. You can totally get a good front end job without a degree. I know some really good web developers that are self taught, that can write code with with the rest of them. So 100% you can get a good front end job without a degree. It's really all about how you kind of present yourself. As long as you're eager to learn and excited about the technology and stuff, and really, you know, uh, professional, but like excited when you start going into job interviews and all of that type of stuff. That shows a lot more than a degree does. Um, I used to work for a company where I'd actually hire developers, and a lot of times, like, it's nice to see that folks went through a program. It shows like dedication and that they're willing to take the time to actually like learn and go through a curriculum and all of that type of stuff. But what really interested me the most is how excited that person was about new technology, about like continuing their education, like continuing to learn and try things, and all of that type of stuff. So it's for me personally, it's a lot more about how excited you are about web development and learning and all of that type of stuff. That's what matters to me, for sure. Yeah, and that's a good strategy. Looking at websites, apps, whatever that you like, and recreating them, figuring out how they work, and going from there is an awesome way to kind of hone your skills and just get better at web development. Following blogs and figuring out like how people structure their code and organization and things like accessibility, and all of that type of stuff helps just add polish onto those projects as well. So as you're building those things, thinking about accessibility and that type of stuff is super important. It'll show to potential employers and stuff that you are thinking about more than just like JavaScript, for example. There's a lot to it. Front end is definitely interesting, and that's kind of part of it too. Is there's just so many different aspects of front end web development that it's good to know about, so that you can kind of get your hands dirty with it and then show to employers that you're like you've got your hands in all the different parts of it. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of interesting stuff for sure. One thing that I would recommend, especially for someone like first starting out, and this is totally personal preference or thought, so you can take this advice or leave it, but like a remote job starting out is a lot harder as like a junior front end developer, someone who, looking for their first web development job. A remote position is going to be a lot harder for you to get good experience. Like actually, um, it's gonna be a lot harder for you to get good like collaboration experience with other web developers, just because and remote jobs are great, but starting out it was extremely beneficial for me to be able to have someone that I was physically sitting next to that I could like tap them on the shoulder and be like, hey, can you walk me through this? Or like, hey, how does this work? Or like, what is your expectation for the task that you've given me? Like having that physical location that you could go to actually talk to that person was really, really helpful for me. So just a piece of advice from someone who's been doing this for a while. Something to think about for sure. But as far as like what I personally look for when I was hiring people, like I said, it's really just that eagerness to learn. As long as you have some work that you can show me, that you can like walk me through your thought process and why you made some of the decisions that you did, and like even showing me or telling me things that you did better or could do better if you were to rebuild this app that you're showing me again. Those types of things are really the things that stick out to me the most when I look to hire someone. I try to remain as as unbiased as anyone possibly can, whether or not someone has like a full college education degree or someone who's self-taught. If you are a person who can write good code, semantic code, who has at least put an effort towards making things accessible, which is super important on the web nowadays. Has put thought and effort into why they're doing things the way that they're doing them. That's what I look for most in someone I'm looking to hire. I really don't care if you are able to write the fanciest JavaScript on the planet that does like some really cool, crazy stuff. Like that's awesome and I appreciate that. But the person who wrote that also has to show a genuine interest in the thing that they wrote. And like an excitement and an eagerness to learn more or do things better, all of that type of stuff. So that's personally what I look for when I hire other people. Unfortunately, the entire web development world doesn't share that opinion. But I think that there are so many opportunities out there right now that like if you're patient and apply to the right places, you'll find someone who values that, and it'll end up being a really good fit. But yeah, definitely, getting that experience and then applying for remote jobs is a solid way to go about it. That's the path that I took. The company I worked at before me and my business partner started this company that we work with right now. I worked for a remote company and I loved it. They were a great set of people. We had really good communication even for a remote company. It was easier than I thought it would be to collaborate with folks in a remote team, but it took a lot of effort. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you've already got a little bit of like professional experience doing this type of stuff, then that puts you ahead of the curve because you've got some production level work that you can show off. And yeah, you're making the right moves. It seems, you're getting a little bit of experience. You're building some stuff on the side, and getting that portfolio site up is going to be helpful for sure to get you into a place where you can start applying for those jobs and nail a full-time gig for sure. Cool. So I think we're gonna get back into the code here. I appreciate that conversation, Lumjack. Oh yeah, any time. I'm super happy to help talk through this stuff. This is my passion. So this is what I really enjoy doing, and being able to stream code and talk to people is like the best thing that I can think of to do to kind of like give back to the community, right? Like, yeah, this stuff is a lot of fun and it provides a lot of opportunity for people. And Yeah, I'm happy to have these conversations. So it's my pleasure helping you out, Lumjack. There's, yeah, no doubt. So let's get back into some of the code, and definitely, as more questions come up, Lumjack, don't hesitate to ask. And like I said, if you drop the either like message me the link to your portfolio or drop it in the chat, and I'll save it for later. I'll take a look and message you offline about what I think, and any feedback I can provide. I'm happy to do that. Cool. So we've got the toggle working. We've got a nice little hover state on our navigation items. I think what we're going to do now is leverage Framer, like we talked about, to actually animate the navigation and stuff in. So let's go ahead and do that. If we go to our actual nav file here, yeah, totally. Whatever you're comfortable with, Lumjack. Yeah, no problem at all. Cool. So yeah, let's leverage Framer here. So one of the nice things, like I was mentioning before about Framer, is it gives us the ability to animate React components that are being mounted and unmounted, and we barely have to think about it. It's a really annoying thing that I've run into before when I've tried to like not use an animation library for this type of stuff. It gets difficult to animate these components when they're mounting and unmounting. It causes a little bit of a headache. So Framer here gives us the ability, and I think there's actually a page on this animate presence value that we can use. Yeah. So this animate presence component essentially allows us to wrap an entire element. A div in this example, in ours, we're going to wrap this entire UL and tell Framer to animate it in and out when it mounts and unmounts. So we can essentially just follow the documentation here, right? So for Framer, we need to import a couple of things. We need to import this motion property and this animate presence property from Framer motion. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll keep it at the top here with the rest of these kind of like node module imports that we're using. We'll import motion and animate presence from Framer. So we've imported that. And based on the example, really all we have to do is so you can see that they're leveraging kind of the same rendering method that we are. Conditional rendering, that's the word I'm looking for. They're leveraging the same conditional rendering bit where they have a component that has some sort of state associated with it that is outputting a div if that state is equal to true, right? So we can essentially just mimic the documentation here almost exactly and just say animate presence. We will wrap this whole conditional here with this animate presence component. And then from there, we can leverage this motion piece to define the element that we actually want to animate. So you can see here, you can use any DOM node that you want, div, nav, ul, any HTML element that you can think of to apply animation to. All you need to do is prefix it with motion dot. So for our purposes, we're animating this entire UL, so we can just do motion.ul and make sure that you have your closing element here match with motion.ul. And then what that does is it exposes a few props that we can pass to this motion component that we've just created. The initial, animate, and exit props essentially just dictate the flow of the animation. For our purposes, we want this animation to slide in from the left, so that's going to be like a translate X animation that we want to do. Framer gives us some different ways to actually, instead of doing like the CSS property like transform translate, they prefer you to use this X and Y notation. There's a big explanation of why they do that in their docs somewhere. But for the sake of brevity here, I'm just going to go with their recommended way of doing things. So we can leverage, instead of opacity here, on our motion.ul, we can do initial. I'm just going to set these up and not have anything in them. Animate and exit. Props. Our initial state for this UL is going to be completely off the screen, right? So that's going to be X, I guess, positive like 100%, right? I'm not sure what the values they allow you to have in here are. Let's see if it allows you to have percentages, because that would be ideal. So let's set our initial animation state to X 100%. I imagine that's going to have to be within quotations as like a string. So X 100%. When this element animates, we want it to animate to X position 0. And then when it exits, we want it to go back to X position 100%. So let's see what we broke, because surely, look at that. That has a terrible like bounce to it that we will definitely fix, but it at least is animating from the right 100% in and out, nice and easy. I'm wondering if potentially, so if you look at the bottom of the screen there, when I toggle this, you can see that the scroll bar shows up as this thing is animating in. We want to avoid that if at all possible, that because, you can very quickly kind of like scroll left and right, and that makes it look a little bit broken. So perhaps instead of using the X value here, let's see if we can animate the width from 0 to, I wonder if we can do auto here, width auto. Let's look in their documentation actually and see if there's anything that has to do with like width. So you've got the transform values, we've got types, transition. So this is actually, this is where we can fix that weird little bounce. Instead of, what are like the types here, because they've got spring, like what else? Tween, spring, or inertia. I suppose let's try the inertia one. I think this is just transition. Yep. So we'll set another prop on here called transition, and then define within the double curly braces. Well, I guess let's see what happens with the width first. Auto is not defined. Does that need to be in quotes maybe? Somewhat. that still has the scroll bar there. Yeah, let's look. There's got to be a good way for us to animate width. Value type conversion in general, values can only be animated between two of the same type. However, HTML components X, Y, width, height, top, left, right, and bottom values have enhanced support and can be animated freely between different value types. Okay. Do you have any examples of animating width? Let's do framer, motion, API, animate width. This just takes us back to the docs. There's not looking like there's going to be much help here. And actually, now that I think about it, we don't need to have this width be auto. We have set in our styled nav CSS that we want this site nav to be 80 VW. So let's just do it that way. Animate this out to 80 VW. Save it. And it's okay, so it's still got the spring on there, that weird spring. I don't know why that's the default. Let's transition. Was that the right? Yeah. So we've got transition, and then we need to define the width. Right, I think. Initial animate. Where did that example go? Here we go. So we need to tell our UL that on this transition, on the specific width transition, the animation type, I guess we're going to change to inertia and see what happens. So this is another object in here that will be type inertia. Is that a colon? Sorry, I keep switching back and forth. Yeah, colon inertia. Let's see if that gets rid of the... It doesn't get rid of the spring. I hate that spring a lot. Let me word wrap here so that we can actually see this, so I don't have to scroll back and forth. Okay, so it's complaining about something here. Let me look at the docs and make sure. Type spring, comma, it's got to, yeah. Okay, that was bizarre. Okay, now the animation's not working at all. What in the world? Let's go with stiffness 100 and see. Does there need to be a comma here? Like, what are you complaining about? Interesting. Maybe width is not something that... Okay, no, there's definitely some sort of weird, like, syntax error going on here. Okay, so we've got transition. Maybe we don't need to define the width like this. this is straight from their docs if that doesn't save. Saving Nav getting code action from ESLint. What in the world is happening here? Okay, let's just get rid of all of this and try and just save the file. Okay, let me, I feel like my VS Code is kind of freaking out here. Let me reload this window. It's throwing like errors for nothing. We'll run the develop server again. Okay, saved that, refresh this. We've got the annoying bounce. It's setting the width. Now, with all of that, let's go back to the transition type spring, stiffness 100 so that it doesn't bounce. You actually let me save that, that's good. Okay. I hate this spring animation a lot. I want to change this to just be like a normal nice easing. Like that breaks it. Framer, remove spring animation. Snappy transition based on value being animated. Yep, so we've got the transition. Okay, here we go. Maybe we can just set the ease to like ease, just ease, rather than like ease. I guess it needs to be, yeah, ease. Set it to ease, and then have the stiffness be 100. We don't need all of that bouncy stuff. Compiled. Okay, so there's got to be some errors. Invalid easing type ease. Okay, ease in out. That's better. All right, that is much better. Oh my goodness, that was that's painful. Okay, great. So now we have a nice easing animation here. It doesn't bounce around a whole bunch, but we're still getting the scroll bar on the bottom. So let's think about that. Why is that happening? So when this UL animates, it's getting this style, this inline style applied to it because of Framer. So Framer writes these values to the actual DOM node on the site. So you can see that that animates. It animates from VW to pixels, which is kind of strange. I wonder if we can change this to 0 VW and get that to animate between, yeah, 2 VW values. Cool, that's good. It's stuck to the right. This is getting overwritten. Let's change the white space on here to no wrap. so that, because you can kind of see, if I get rid of that real quick, if you see, it's kind of tough to see, but as the I think we can actually change the duration of this to something, let's say like 5 seconds, just so that you can see. Oh, that's because I forgot a comma. I know. So you see how the About Us text starts on 2 lines, and then as we go back down super slowly, it bumps down. Once the width starts getting a little bit too narrow, it bumps that text down. We can add in our CSS for the site nav, we can add a white space, no wrap, to it to force that text to always stay on one line. I don't know why that error keeps coming up. That is super obnoxious. So then as we go back down, you'll see that the About Us part does not drop down onto 2 lines. So the reason now, this slowing it down actually helped me understand why. The reason that we are getting this scroll bar is because we have some padding set on the UL itself, which is messing with the way that the animation is interpreting the width of this. So I wonder, I mean, if we did not border box sizing, it's still kind of freaking out about it. Okay, so let's just remove the padding on here for right now and see if we can just smooth out that animation a little bit. Interesting. Oh, it is because there is inherited padding. So we just need to define that padding as 0. I need to keep canceling that, and I have no idea why. It's incredibly obnoxious. Okay. So the animation is at least now nice and smooth. What we can do potentially, let's start this animation. Let me inspect this guy. And if we did like overflow hidden on this, does that get rid of the scroll bar? That it does. Spectacular. Okay, so we'll just do that. Overflow hidden. Awesome. I will cancel that. I don't know what's happening there. I need to spell hidden correctly. So we've got overflow hidden. I wonder, can we add the padding? Maybe let's add the padding to the individual. It should be able to take into account this padding. And maybe what we'll need to do here, once I save and cancel this, I don't know what's happening. Maybe what we can do here is actually calc that ADVW plus the 3 rems of padding that we have on there. And you're going to yell at me about something. Cancel. Yeah, thank you. Are you smooth or no? Are you able to actually animate that? It's strange that it animates it out in pixels like that and then sets the calc here. It's kind of bizarre. I guess if it's padding left and right, would it need to be 6 rems? And the exit is, oh my gosh, wrap. The exit is set to 0 VW. Okay, I'm going to remove that extra duration here because this is getting painful to test. Okay, that's seemingly working now. Let's look at the calc and see. It's still doing it to pixels. That's so strange. Yeah, I guess in any case, that's working more or less how we'd like it. I will probably spend some more time trying to figure out why. Well, you can see it does kind of like jump there at the end. So here, for our purposes, let's just do 80 VW. I'm going to remove the padding on the site nav itself. I need to do that. I'm going to remove the padding there, and I'm going to add the padding left to each individual LI. And then we'll kind of go from there. Yeah, so that's super smooth. So we'll just kind of work with that for now. I think that puts us in a good spot for this animation. Even when we go down to like mobile sizes, the nav is going to take up 80% width. We can do some media query stuff to potentially just have that nav be full width on mobile. So let's do that. I'm going to define a couple of variables here. So we're going to export const mq for media queries. And this is going to house an object that will have each individual export const. We'll call this like BP small. And this BP small is going to be max width. Let's do like 480 pixels. And then add this BP small to the media query object. I will save that. You're going to yell at me for something. Like, what is this? Getting code actions from ESLint. Like, what is this? Okay, let's change this. What am I configuring here? Editor, code actions on save. Code actions, what in the world? ESLint autofix on save, false. Stop that. Whatever is happening here is super annoying. Okay, great. You're not yelling at me anymore. That's wonderful. Okay, so what we're trying to do here. So on our site nav, the width on mobile should be 100%. So by default, 100 vertical width. I think I did this backwards. We want this BP small to be min width 480 pixels. So I'm essentially, what I'm doing here is I'm just defining a string that I can use as like a media query variable. that I can use anywhere. So BP small is related specifically to 480 pixels, to that breakpoint in particular. Past 480 pixels, we'll have stuff happen, right? So within our styled component CSS, we can do at media, and then space in parentheses is where we would import our BP. Hello? At media, I want you to do BP or mq.bp small. Why is this not escaping? Because it's in parentheses. Excuse me. Do I not remember how to write media queries? Styled component media query. Yeah, I'm not crazy. At media, and then in parentheses, this does not need to be in quotes. I should be able to write out a variable here. I'm just gonna do this and see what happens. We will import all of the media queries, and I will do mq.bp small. And within here, we should now be able to do everything past 480 pixels wide is going to be width ADVW. Let's see if you break. No. My VS Code is just absolutely freaking out on me today. So we are past that 480 pixels. If we scroll down to about there, it should go down to full width. Did you not compile correctly? Oh, it's because of the animation. Oh, that presents an interesting challenge. I'm going to have to think about that. Okay, we will table that for now. The reason that this isn't going to work is because on our nav.js, we're defining the width for Framer. So Framer is setting as an inline style this width to ADVW. Our media query is not firing because this value isn't set in the CSS. So I'll have to think about that a little bit more. So we'll ignore this for now. No big deal. Awesome. Okay. Well, in any case, I think that we're in a pretty good spot right now. How long have we been going? Yeah, we've been going for almost 2.5 hours now. And I definitely want to make sure that this is digestible. So I think this will be a decent place for us to stop. We've covered a lot of ground. I think a lot of conceptual stuff as far as like component organization and all of that. Animations, we've gone over a good amount of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this offline. I'm going to add a couple of the pieces that we talked about, whether that ends up being a Twitter feed or just a grouping of content or something like that down here at the bottom is kind of to be determined. If it ends up that I do something that I think is worth either streaming or creating a video on, I'll do that separately and just post it up on the YouTube. Otherwise, It's literally just going to be me positioning things in CSS and adding a couple of content areas. So it's not going to be anything like super educational, I suppose. So yeah, in any case, I think we're in a good spot here to stop. We've got a good interaction with this nav. The one thing that I suppose we could do really quick is just the animate this into an X to close it when it's open. We can do that real quick. What we're going to want to do is add a class name to the activator once it's clicked. And we can set that on our activator. I'm wondering the best way for us to do that. Let me move this over a little bit. So on our activator, we want to add a class name to this button. So we're going to want to pass down the current state of the activator to the button itself. So we have this onClick prop that we're already passing down. Let's add an isOpen prop to this and see where that gets us. So on the activator, we're going to take in this isOpen prop and toggle a class name based on it. So instead of just a normal string here, we're going to do a template literal within curly brackets. We always want this class name to be activator, but in addition to that, we want to toggle an active like modifier class to this, right? So through the template literal, we can inject some JavaScript in here, and we can say if is open, then output a modifier class of active to the activator. And I'm going to remove this space and add the space to the active class so that there's not an extraneous space there when we don't need it. So if it's open, then we're just doing a normal ternary operator here. So we're saying if this if the nav is open, then apply an active class to this button. Otherwise, don't output anything. So we'll see what that breaks. Let's do an inspect on here. That doesn't break a thing. That's perfect. So you can see here that this active modifier class is being toggled when we open and close. Wonderful. I'm going to set this back to false by default before I forget. So by default, our navigation is going to be closed. So when I refresh the page, it shouldn't be closed or shouldn't be open. I can click it, it'll open and close. Perfect. So now we can use that modifier class to actually style some stuff. So in here, we'll do active. So if the activator has a class of active on it, the before pseudo element here, essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to transform and rotate each of these individual pseudo elements. So both of them are probably going to need a transform origin of 50% so that we can then flip them by doing a transform, let's say like rotate, sure, 45 degrees. So you can see that these, the before and after are both rotating 45 degrees like we're telling them to, and it's doing it from the center, which is good. So we can, let's look at the smallest value for the before. So the before is on the top. We want it to swing down. Let's try something a little fancy here. We want this to swing down about 45 degrees. Okay, so the before and after are both going to have a transform origin of 0. So we want this to animate from the left center so that it kind of like swings down, and then the line on the bottom transforms from the left center and swings up. So it's gonna, you'll see. I think that makes sense. We'll find out. Transform origin we've got there. When it's active, the before, we want to rotate or transform rotate 45 degrees. And the after, we want to transform rotate. I think that's going to be negative 45 degrees, right? That is correct. And then we're going to need to do a little bit of positioning. Yeah. Rotate negative 45 degrees. And then we're also going to, let's go ahead and save that. I'm also going to add a transition to these. Transition, 300 milliseconds, transform ease. Okay, so you can see that we've got a nice little transform happening. We just need to adjust the like X and Y position of each of these. So on the before, which is the top one, we're going to move this up. So we're going to translate Y like negative 1 rem. It's going to need to be even less than that for sure. We're just going to have to kind of guess. That is not at all. Oops. Oh my goodness. Hello? Wow. Struggling. Okay, let's go with negative. And that's got to be negative. Well, there we go. That's actually about perfect. I think we want this to go down just a little bit more. 5.5. That visually, that looks about right. Oh my goodness, what a struggle. All right, so we've got the after set to translate Y 0.55 rems. On the before, we've got it set to negative 0.06 rems. Deleted that, lovely. All right, let's save that. Let me just refresh to make sure that none of my CSS is still stuck in there. And we're good. And because we have the action happening here, we can trying to think of a good way that we can handle the focus, that blue outline, to still give some visual indication when a user is focused on it, so that people that navigate with a keyboard or you know, people that have bad eyesight or anything like that can still have some sort of visual cue that they're focused on the nav activator. way for us to go about that. Perhaps on focus, we change the before and after background color. Let's change it to colors dot tulip. Or, oops, what other variables did we have going on here? We had, let's go with blue-green. Since we've got that hover state set to blue-green, I think blue-green would make sense for the focus color as well. So we'll go with blue-green, and we'll set the outline to none. You want to be very, very deliberate whenever you do an outline of none on a focus. And actually, this needs to be on the button itself. So anytime you do an outline none, you are specifically removing one of the only indicators that a person who navigates with a keyboard has to determine what on their screen is active. So as long as you have something that is a clear visual indication that something is focused on, then you're safe to remove the outline. But you want to think very carefully about why you're removing the outline for someone who uses the keyboard to navigate. So I think, and the contrast of that may not actually be very good. Let's tulip yellow gallery. We may actually have to, because the contrast of that focus, it's really hard to see, at least on my screen, and it may just be my monitor settings. We can check the accessibility of the those two colors. Let's see. Is it colorable? Yeah. Let's check the text is going to be our blue-green. And the background color is gallery on that nav. So yeah, that contrast is not great. Do we have any? That definitely fails. How does tulip fare? Also fails. This is 100% going to fail. Blue-green, again, is going to fail. Okay, so none of the colors in our color palette, except for black, pass any sort of contrast accessibility standard. So let's rethink how we want to do this. Maybe let's just leave the outline but change the style a bit. Let's change the outline to something like we can do outline style dotted. Outline. Outline width thin. Maybe we just leave it default for right now. And think through that a little bit. There may be some interaction that we can do where the two bars separate up and down a little bit. I guess we can try that. But I want it to be enough for the user to really recognize that they're focused on that. I don't think that this transform translates y. We'll do negative rems. And then for the after, we'll do positive 5.5 rems. Oops, it needs to be after. You know what? I actually don't mind that. If we remove the outline, is that enough indication? I mean, that's a pretty big jump. So that should hopefully give good indication that you're focused on that. Now the problem though is when they focus on the X and it's active. We can change this up a little bit so that the focus we can do, you know, outline style dotted or dashed. There we go. That might. I am such a silly person. What in the world? Okay, stop hitting the wrong button here. Let's do 0.5 rem. There we go. That'll at least give a little bit more of an indication on the close that they've focused that, and it's a little bit more in line with the style of the rest of our site too. So let's just let's do that. Let's outline style needs to go below that. All right. Cool. So visual indication that they focused on the nav to begin with, an indication that they're still focused on it. You know, they can tab through the navigation items, go back to that, and there's a good indication that they're focused on it. I think that's a pretty good deal. What we need to do on this hover though is make sure that the focus state also gives the indication. We want to make sure that the outline is gone on this one as well. Again, we have a very clear indicator that the nav item is being focused on, so we are okay to be able to remove that outline. Cool. I think that that is a good spot for us to leave it here for today. That is a almost 3-hour video. So if you've stuck with me for this long, I really, really appreciate you. Lumjacker, thank you again for the solid conversation. And I wish you the best of luck, you know, in your career and moving forward and stuff. So, cool. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and sticking with me as we kind of figured out some animation stuff, talked through component structure, organization, all of that type of stuff. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, different ways of doing things, if I did something wrong, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments and everything below. And yeah, thank you so much. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk soon. All right.